Hello, I'm Josephine Burton and welcome back to the Dash Arts podcast, seeing the world through an artistic lens. Dash is all about crossing and travelling across borders, across art forms, languages, cultures, communities and nations. And I'm aware that often so many of these borders are ignored, exploited or silenced. And so we've dedicated this podcast as part of our Breaking Silences series to some extraordinary international artists who are attempting to explore and heal, bridge and give voice to some of these silences. We begin with Krzysztof Czyzewski, a theatre director and founder of Borderlands, or Pogranicze, an inspiring arts organisation based in an old white synagogue in Sejny in northeastern Poland, who I met many years ago. As I was thinking a little bit about the artists that I wanted to speak to, or who inspired me, or who were involved in these issues, I was thinking a lot about your work in Pogranicze and at Borderlands. I visited nearly 20 years ago, and which inspired me then and continues to inspire me today. I wondered if you might be able to tell me a little bit about the founding of Borderlands and the work that you've done there.
Thank you, Josephine, for this invitation and for letting me speak about silence also in this context of silence in culture, which is very close to me. Just one thing before I tell something about the Borderland. When I was a artistic director of European Capital of Culture in Wrocław and preparing the program, my idea was to create a year of silence before Wrocław becomes European Capital of Culture. A year of, being slow, calm down, for preparation, to feel. But this is something I believe we lost in culture. We have event after event and no breaks. And maybe this pandemic time helps to think more about slowing down, being more intimate and silent. Coming back to the Borderland, it was my team I work with. It was an avant-garde alternative theater, and the Autumn of Nations came in 1989. We decided to stop our activity on the festivals, on traveling, from one international festival to another, and to travel to the east, to have a journey to the east. In Poland, we ended up as close to the Soviet, at that time, border as it was possible. Today is the border with Lithuania and Belarus, but at that time was a Soviet border. And we decided not to pass through the small town Sejny, as usually we did before as theater troupe, but to stay now for 30 years. And this was for us really a revolutionary decision, not to stop on permanent travel as artists, as a theater group, but to stop, to establish life among the people with the concrete community, Borderland community, and to develop artistic educational programs along the challenges, necessities, problems we faced in that community, in that particular context. That was the beginning of the Borderland. And the name of our center and foundation is very important. In Polish, it sounds Pogranicze. In English, it is sometimes misleading translation Borderline Foundation or Borderline Center. And to explain why it is not borderline, but Borderland, says a lot about our work and our philosophy. So it's not about strict divisions, borders which cuts the community or into different sides or so on, but it's about the land, common place, common memory, where borders are inside. ethnic borders, cultural borders, generation borders, all kinds of borders, but you embrace it as a whole, belonging to the same community. And art of living in such context is art of bridging, of crossing to other side, being aware or experiencing differences, borders, conflicts, traumatic memories, all that, but there's no way to live without bridges, without communication, without establishing the space for dialogue or coexistence. So it was, that's how the Borderlands started, in fact, to understand what this tradition of borderland is, not the borderline, no, not the strict, national borders of national states or so on, but multicultural or intercultural community.
My impression and memories of when I was there is, as you say, it wasn't necessarily a national borders, because national borders have always been so blurred, haven't they, particularly in northeastern Poland. It's sometimes been part of Poland, it's sometimes been part of Russia, it's sometimes been part of Lithuania. But it was also the many, many peoples that have lived in that area.
That was why we decided to live and establish our center in that region. It was during communist time. We had this experience that we live in homogeneous country. It's only Polish language, Catholic or religion, and that's it.
Coming back to this question of silence, do you feel when you arrived there back in kind of 89, 90, that time that you started to settle, did you feel that there was just this great wall of silence around the heterogeneity of the cultures there?
Yes, indeed. It was this very specific silence from the communist era, better not to speak about difficult things from the past. Better not to share it with your children or grandchildren. Better for the future, because to know it, to be involved in that, it was kind of danger, that you will be stigmatized and persecuted by communist authorities. Everything what belongs to the past was stigmatized by communists as something wrong, in shadow. Now we are building new world and only new things are good. So this was one kind of silence toward the past. Another kind was concerning conflicts, even wars. There was a Polish-Lithuanian war in that borderland after First World War, 1990, 1920, Poles and Lithuanians had a battle about a newly designed border between our countries, a new border. Never before this borderline existed in that region. So it was like to divide people even within the families. One part of the family was on one side of the border, another on the other. It was a fresh process of creating a new national identities. And it was sometimes a matter of free choice. You could become a Lithuanian or Polish or Belarusian or Jewish, and it was up to your decision. Sometimes. So sometimes it happens that in the same family, in one family, the brother chose to be Lithuanian and the sister Polish. After all, were put into the silence. Don't speak about that. Don't speak to your children in families that they have, being Polish families, they have Lithuanian aunts or Jewish grandmother. Don't speak about that. We live in Polish homogeneous world. The same was with Lithuanians and so on. So what I told you before about the borderland, about this connective tissue between different people, which created a kind of culture, spiritual heritage, was destroyed. and into the pieces. It was like a mosaic which breaks into the pieces, small units which are now separated. So our role became to speak up about this, to dig up into the ground of these memories and to work with young generation about the roots, about the family past, about the neighbors, about the borderland as it was in the past.
And Krzysztof, I remember very strongly and very strikingly from my visit a performance in Polish. I have a memory that the young people in Sejny had asked their grandparents the stories of what the village was like when they were growing up, and then you'd made a piece of theatre from those stories. Is that correct?
Yes, your memory is right. It was called Sejny Chronicles. And still we perform it. It's a very special performance. Now 25 years from the premiere. And we perform it from one generation to another generation. This is a story of the town, of living together in town, in different languages, with different songs, dances, and stories collected from old people. Yes, from all kind of backgrounds they have. So young people in Sejny, when they go to our theater, they are introduced. They have tutors of the older generation, of their colleagues who are just after 5-6 years leaving Sejny Chronicles and making room for new generation who somehow is incarnated, into the same stories, but also enriched by new stories they collect. And so the performance is growing. But the very important thing about this is that it is common story. That after all these pieces, different languages, crumbs of memories, histories, you collect under one roof, which creates home for everybody who was living and is living here. And this is how we try to create the borderland in form of theater performance.
Can you tell me a little bit, Krzysztof, about how the communities have reacted to your work breaking the silences through art?
Thank you for this question, because it's crucial. Of course, we were outsiders coming to the small town, artists, gypsies, as people from the beginning were telling about us, or later when they realized that we started to deal also with Jewish culture or Jewish memories, they used, some of them, they used to say, Jews came to our town. We were from the beginning the others, who came, and the crucial thing was to build a trust between us and the community. And so the first decision we made at the beginning was to stop being a theater as it was before. So we came as a theater troupe, performing a few times in synagogue. But then the question was, what's next? And the next was to stop being a theater, to come down from the stage to the people, to hear them, to listen, to speak to them. Young people were our messengers. So the first connection we've made was with young people in Sejny. We offered them different artistic studios, film, theater, music. Let's do something in art. But on that way, we put these questions, okay, but what about you? What about your family history? What about the history of that town? Is it interesting for you? Does it matter? It became fascinating somehow for young people. And from the beginning, old people were saying like that, okay, you are newcomers, you are greenhorns, you don't know nothing about this, what we pass, in the 20th century, all these tragedies and so on. And we keep our memories, we keep our truths, but the way you work with our children and grandchildren is good for their future.
Krzysztof mentioned that the older generation found it difficult to talk about the traumas because they're so much closer to their source. I chatted with Athina Kasiou on the last episode of our podcast about her work releasing female voices. As part of the conversation, we also spoke about the island of Cyprus itself. In 1974, Turkey invaded Cyprus. Today, more than 30% of the island is part of the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, a country only recognised by Turkey as an independent state. Many families were forcibly relocated through the upheaval. There is so much that is unspoken around this great rip across the island. Athina told me how the younger generation are trying to lead their communities away from the silences around it. I'm really excited and interested in the work that the arts can do around politics, I suppose, as well, to reveal some of the silences across our societies. A big silence in some ways is the politics of the land of Cyprus and its extremely fraught and complicated history. Is there work being done in Cyprus, in northern Cyprus, that explores some of those silences that exist about the houses, about the communities?
There is work that's been done. I don't think enough. I think there's still this fear of keeping quiet. I think there's still fear of what our history is, what our identity is. It's still very, very sensitive, and we're still not courageous enough, I think, sometimes to really dig in and start understanding those wounds and why we are scared sometimes to reflect, put a mirror against ourselves, which I think that's what we need to be doing. But there are definitely work that's been done. There's local playwrights that are writing constantly about this with not a nostalgic or a biased sort of view, but truly engaging with understanding of what is happening. We are the generation to be doing it. My father's generation, I think, because they were really close to the trauma, I don't think they could have handled it in that way. I think we have a responsibility to look back to our history, understand where we're coming from, and reach out. It has been silent for a very long time.
Athina's energy and her passion to make change happen made me wonder how long change really takes to spread from these small communities to the wider world. Do you see change happening in other parts of Poland?
I think yes. My answer was yes. The big cities, metropolis, are great borderlands now, and becoming more and more borderlands. And you have archipelago of different districts of the town, small quarters, neighborhoods. You see, it grows, I call it now the small center of the world. That there is a small town and you created a center of the world there. And I think there is something important in that, that you give people and yourself possibility to live in the small center of the world. It's about being rooted, being engaged in your neighborhood, in the community building. And that's a way people who can do it, they don't have problems with opening themselves, with being hospitable, with being empathic to the others. When you have home, you can think about being hospitable. When do you not have home, you hesitate, you are uprooted somehow, and your behavior towards strangers, toward newcomers, outsiders, is based on prejudices very often, based on your weakness and fear against the other. So to struggle with this fear, you invest in your home.
It's just a beautiful idea, Krzysztof. I really love it, and I love the polyphony of small centres of the world. It's a gorgeous concept. Can you tell me, how would you say it in Polish, small centres of the world?
Małe centrum świata.
Krzysztof's idea that prejudice is often born out of our own displacement or lack of place in the world was really powerful. It also led me to think of all those who've been driven from their homes. Nawroz Oranari is an Iraqi Kurdish singer and freedom fighter who was silenced under the dictatorship of Saddam Hussein and eventually sought refuge in the UK. He now sings with the wonderful Citizens of the World choir, a choir for people who are refugees, asylum seekers, migrants, and the wider community of Londoners. The story that led him to the UK is a remarkable one. It was really a pleasure to hear about the Citizens of the World choir generally and to hear a little bit about your story. And I wondered if you could share that with me, and specifically, potentially, to think a little bit about how silence or being silenced has impacted on you and your work.
It damaged me in many ways, because when I was a child, I became known in my city as a singer. My story is very long, but I'm going to try to make it very short. Then I became a teenager, and then I sang against Saddam Hussein's regime. Then when I was arrested, and then I had to sign a pledge to say from now on I'm not allowed to sing even among my friends, and my father has to sign the same pledge. And if I were caught another time singing even among my friends, then I should accept the death penalty for myself. And it was my first time, and I was young, and I was not even 17 years old. Then I stayed a few years. I couldn't stay in Iraq anymore because I was under pressure. And as a teenager, as a singer, I just wanted to express myself, not to be silent. It's very difficult to keep a singer silent. And then I joined the Kurdish revolution. In the revolution, my duty was to sing for people and to recruit people and to communicate with people emotionally. Because in those days, Saddam Hussein's regime was the most strongest regime in Middle East. And so because of his jet wars, we couldn't be active during daytime, but at nighttime, we were active. During daytime, we used to hide in caves. And then I stayed there in the revolution, and then illegally I went to see my original tribe, which they came from north of Kurdistan, and on the map is called Southeast Turkey, and we hate to call it Southeast Turkey. And the government in Turkey was a Turkish military fascist government, and I was arrested there, and then I was released on condition not to leave the city, and I had to sign every morning at the police station saying I'm here and this is my signature. And then one day, some of our Kurdish freedom fighters from Iraq side, I'm still talking about Kurdistan, but it's been divided among those 4 countries. And officially they are called Iran, Iraq, Turkey, and Syria. But in reality, it's Kurdistan, and there are artificial borders. And I was in a coffee shop. I met a friend of mine, and he said to me, hey, this is what happened last night, and one of your friends got arrested, and if you don't escape from Turkey, he might reveal your name under the condition, and this time the Turkish government definitely is going to extradite you to Iraq, and which means you are going to be executed by Saddam Hussein's regime. So find a way.
Well, it's an extraordinary story, Nawroz, and thank you so much for sharing it. I mean, unbelievable. During that time in Turkey, were you still singing? Were you working as a musician?
Oh, in Turkey, my goodness, that was the biggest crime if you sing in Kurdish, or even if you could speak 1 or 2 sentences in Kurdish. That's it. That's the end of you.
What's interesting for me is listening to you talk about it, and you're phenomenally matter of fact about it. But presumably, you have many languages that you function in. How many languages do you speak?
Yeah, in terms of languages, I speak Arabic, Farsi, Kurdish fluently, and I speak 60% of Turkish language, and I understand 50% of the Hindi language, a bit of Urdu, and I am trying deliberately to learn Latin and Greek in order to improve my English language, because I'm not satisfied.
How did you find the choir, the Citizens of the World choir?
Yeah, I joined the choir in 2018, and the choir gave me, the performance, the platform to sing and to express myself in Britain. particularly in London, and I really love it. And we've got some great singers with us. Not every single member is a singer, but that's not the point of the choir. It's the communication, and it's like communicating with people emotionally. We've got some lawyers, some doctors, engineers with us, and they are not singers, but they love singing. What the choir gave me, it gave me like another tongue, another microphone, another language to sing in. Sometimes we sing in Welsh, other times we sing in the languages that's spoken in South Africa, in Kurdish, in Arabic, in other languages. So it's an international great choir.
Oh, it's lovely. Well, you have a voice now. I mean, you must feel that. How does it feel to have a voice, to be able to talk about all these stories?
It's our responsibility not to keep silent and to fight the oppressor. Yeah. So in England, it gives me more opportunity because London gave me passport. I can travel freely and sing in Ireland or America or Germany. So I have the bigger responsibility now. Because when I was singing in a small town, I would sing for that small town in Kurdistan and be isolated. No one would know about me. But in London, it's a different platform. London is the heart of the world. But I'll continue and find subject which is kept silence by force or by fear.
I just loved Navroz's comment that it's very difficult to keep a singer silent. So many artists in this podcast series talked of their commitment and need to speak out and have a voice. I've also thought about times when silence can also be necessary or more powerful. In your experience of doing this extraordinary work over the last, more than 30 years, have you experienced times when it's not appropriate to break the silences? Are there some silences which, as artists, we have a responsibility to keep quiet?
Mm-hmm. When Arvo Pärt, the Estonian composer, you know very well about him, but he was our Borderlander. He received our award of being Borderlander. So it means the man who can cross the borders and so on. And when he had a speech in our white synagogue about what it means to be a Borderlander, he said, but remember, there are borders which you shouldn't cross. Of course, there is something in it very important for our work that you should respect. Another thing is the time dimension. You know, when, for example, we have a publishing house and we publish very painful book for Poles about the Jedwabne case. This is a small town, another small town not far from Sejny, where during the Holocaust, Polish part of the community murdered Jewish neighbors. And we published it after 10 years of our activity. And of course, it created a very controversial, risky situation for our center. There were politicians demanding, to close down the center and so on. We are a local community center. We are not only NGO supported from outside money, but we are center supported by local regional government, which is crucial for our work. And of course, be loyal to them, to be in dialogue with them, to convince them that the way we spend this public money is good and so on. So I'm telling all this, coming back to such difficult situations, like you touch very, very painful memory, you touch the wound, you open the wound. Breaking the silence is something what you can do only from inside, together with people.
It reminds me a lot of I recorded for a podcast last year with a wonderful former Yugoslavian theatre director who's been working in Bosnia with young people. And she talked a lot about the silences in Bosnia still today. She felt that it was unethical to be breaking some of those silences and talking about the past where there wasn't the support for people. Like once you opened the floodgates of the stories and the memories without proper support to help people, what could you do with those, the kind of the wounds? And it sounds like in some ways you agree with her, you just need to be there. You need to have the time and build the trust and be there for the fallout.
This is something I understood during Yugoslav war and experiencing what happened in breaking of Yugoslavia. You never know what can happen with you under dramatic circumstances when your life and life of your children is at stake at the very moment. You never know how you will behave as a mother, as a father of family, when the life is threatened. So the lesson I've got is don't judge people. You don't have legitimacy to judge people. Work with them. Try to understand why it happened. When they use the language of hatredness, when they use the language which is painful, for the others, we use this slogan, very often. Everything starts from the language of hatred. But it is not true. Nothing starts from the language of hatred. There is always something before. Something in your childhood, in your family, in your courtyard, which makes you feel this prejudice or fear against the others, against opening, against sharing with others. So there is something before, and we are somehow responsible for that, and in schools, as teachers, as local authorities, as a government, as many structures which allows that people are not capable at the very moment to curb the challenge of tolerance, yes, of being empathic. So you go deeper, you go to these roots and try to raise questions to help people with this struggle, with this process. Because what is important, Josephine, in all these things is something what I call good memory. People after conflicts have bad memories about the past, about the neighbors, about the other side of the conflict they were engaged in. But these bad memories are not everything. It's not 100% of bad memories. There are some good memories, some needs of good, make a good gesture. And the problem is that we do not know how to dig up this good thing from inside the community or personal individual. We have culture of conflict, in media, in language, in school, in culture. There is a clash. Be yourself, keep your identity means against the others. You have enemies. You are not the same, and so on. So we know this negative language of defending yourself. In Mostar, when we work, for example, people were hiding memories of helping neighbors. You become a hero because you were struggling with the others. But there were many gestures like that in Mostar. People helped each other. But there was silence about that. When we only came as outsiders, and sometimes it helps to be outsider. Did you help each other during the war? And suddenly you have people crying because there was first time somebody asked them about that. So our work very much is about opening culture from inside to search elements, sources, ideas in the cultures which help to open it from inside and make it less restrictive, as it usually is today.
Krzysztof's mission to start difficult conversations and open old wounds so that they could heal properly and release good memories resonated with me during my conversation with Athina and the struggle to speak out about such fresh trauma in Cyprus. I was reading up on my kind of the history of Cyprus. I don't think I had fully absorbed how recent the division was. 1974, it's really recent.
It's so raw, but we need to talk about it. Yes, my grandmother left her house. My father was born in Drahonas, which is a village it's occupied now. I've been once to the north part. I don't have friends from the north part, where if I go abroad, I will connect with people. It's just here, it feels segregated, and I think it's a good time for theatre to act to make those bridges, because this is our identity. I mean, there's a new play now coming. It's called Out of Necessity. And I'm really looking forward to see it by two women theatre makers, which is exploring this issue. So the work's been created, and there's this encouragement about new plays and writing new plays and cultivating this voice, this authorship. Cyprus has been maybe sometimes waiting for the voices of Greece or the voices of England to write our narratives. And now we are creating our narrative, and we are becoming the authors of ourselves. So this is really good. This is really encouraging.
Do you use silence a lot in your work as a director?
I try to understand the situation of what's happening between the two characters. So I think I don't use them in a technical way. I try to use them in a way that it's meaningful regarding the relationship between the two characters. So I think I do use silences, but not in a way to make the point that there is the silence, but just if there's a need for the character to be silenced, or for that moment in the relationship to have the silence.
Obviously, we've had a year of silence in the theatres. What have you done as an artist? What have you created and been working on and thinking about? How has it been for you, this year of silence?
Here in Cyprus, we had a couple of lockdowns, and then we opened again. Theatres are open now, which is amazing, but half the capacity. So I have been working on a play by Sam Shepard, which, as a theatre maker, I made the decision 2 years ago, and it was interesting for me as I grew through these projects about women's voice, to look back at this decision of making a work by an American male playwright. But it was amazing to go back to rehearsals, to be with people, to talk about plays, but I think more about going back to a community. And when we had the chance to share the work with 25 audience members, because that was the permitted capacity, how important that coming together was. It feels like the pandemic was just like the inciting incident and exposed everything that was troubling about systems, about governments, about health systems. I'm afraid to say, but maybe this is only the beginning of how the future is looking.
Wow. Say more about what you mean by that.
The pandemic is one event, then something else will happen. I mean, we're seeing climate change of what we're doing. I mean, in a theatrical play, when there is a external event, something outside of the world of the play happens, it brings everyone into conflict. There's pressures, things change, the situation changes, so everything bubbles up. All the problems of the society, of the problems of the community, of the problems of a family come out. And with this pandemic, I mean, here in Cyprus, we're trying to, I don't know how you say it in English, the status of the artist status. We're trying to get really, really simple things happening, so artists could have a way of surviving this time. Or we've seen government corruption, or we've seen people going up the streets demanding things. I think the pandemic just pushed everything out. It's like a pressure play. I don't know. It's like everything has come out. The Me Too force now that people are telling their stories, I think it has come out from this silence. People's voices are louder now, maybe because they've been silenced.
I love the idea from Athena that silence can amplify our voices. Krzysztof also spoke about the power of silence.
When I speak about silence, it is, not only about calming down yourself, which is very important, but about giving the room to the other. Creating silence is calling for the presence of the other. That's how it is important. The silence is so important. When we are speaking, making noise, there is no room. Even if we have good intentions, and we could speak about the others and so on. But if we are not shut up and give time and space for silence, there is a little chance that the other will appear in the way of the presence of their own voice, different from ours. which more and more you work on that, you understand that this voice comes also from yourself, that it was, the silence was also in yourself, that you were tabooing or keeping in silence something what is inside you. And suddenly, because I don't believe that the other is only the external presence. The other is very much about something what lives and is part of ourselves. There is no me without the other. So to become yourself, in fact, you need this other voice. You need to silence yourself.
It was really a huge privilege to speak to Nawroz, Athina and Krzysztof, to be silent in order to hear their voices. As part of our conversation, Krzysztof had talked about the power of the anticipatory silence in the theatre before the performance begins. I love the idea that the silence of our COVID year has allowed us to hear other voices and hopefully to create change. As part of our conversation, Nawroz shared a Kurdish folk song. We'll play out our podcast with his voice. Next time on the Dash Arts podcast, we'll complete the series exploring censorship and self-censorship from Beckett to Brexit. You can subscribe to our podcast via our website or wherever you get your podcasts to ensure you don't miss it. And if you like the Dash Arts podcast, follow the show, share, and please leave us a review. It helps us stay visible and not silent and would mean the world to us. The Dash Arts podcast was produced by Rachel Head. I'm Josephine Burton, and we'll be back in a fortnight with more conversations. Thank you for listening.
مقاسيين دمس قالوا بدرهمان آخ يا مان يا مان آي لي أوي 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 هل يا مايا يا 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 بابو يا مايا دا يا مان هل يا مان هل يا مان توزي كريم اي موسيقى جيش عابتي معي بندبان بحران آخ يا مان يا مان آی لی اوی 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 اوی